May 1969, Fillmore East, New York City. A Tuesday night show, the second of three consecutive performances Jimi Hendrix Experience had scheduled that week. The venue wasn't huge by rock standards, capacity around 2,600, but it was packed. Every seat filled, people standing in the aisles, the air thick with smoke and anticipation. The Fillmore had a reputation. It wasn't some massive arena where you watch tiny figures on a distant stage. This was intimate, close, almost claustrophobic. You could see the sweat on the performers' faces, hear the strings vibrate, feel the amps rumble in your chest. When Jimi played the Fillmore, you didn't just hear the music, you lived inside it. Michael Torres had been working security at the Fillmore for 2 years. He was 28, ex-military, took the job seriously. His role was simple: keep the crowd controlled, keep the performers safe, keep the show running smoothly. No exceptions. That night, Michael was stationed stage left, positioned between the audience and the performers. He'd worked dozens of rock shows, seen it all. Fans rushing the stage, fights breaking out, bottles thrown, people passing out from the heat and the crowd pressure. His job wasn't to enjoy the music. His job was to watch for problems. Jimi Hendrix Experience was halfway through their set. The band had been playing for maybe 45 minutes. Jimi was in the middle of Voodoo Child, that massive, sprawling jam that could go anywhere, last forever. His white Stratocaster was feeding back, wailing, making sounds that seemed impossible for a guitar to produce. The crowd was transfixed. Nobody moving, nobody talking. Just 2,000 people locked into what Jimi was doing with 6 strings and a wall of Marshall amps. Michael had heard Jimi play before, worked several of his shows. It never got old. Even when you were supposed to be watching the crowd, your eyes kept drifting to the stage, to those hands moving across the fretboard, to the way Jimi bent notes that shouldn't bend, sustained sounds that shouldn't sustain. But Michael forced himself to stay focused. Watch the crowd, scan for movement, look for problems before they become emergencies. That's when he saw her. Front row, slightly left of center. A young woman, maybe 19 or 20, long dark hair, wearing a simple dress. She'd been sitting still for the entire show, just like everyone else. But now she was standing. Then she was moving. Before Michael could process what was happening, she was climbing onto the stage. Training took over. Michael moved fast, covering the distance in seconds. His hand reached for her arm as she stood up on the stage, disoriented, blinking in the lights. The crowd behind her was a blur of faces, some shocked, some laughing, some screaming. Michael's grip was firm, not brutal, but unmistakable. He'd done this 100 times. Grab, turn, remove. Quick and professional. The show continues like nothing happened. But as his hand closed around her arm, the music stopped. Not gradually, not a fade out. Just stopped. Jimi had lifted his hand off the strings. The feedback died. Mitch Mitchell's drums went silent. Noel Redding's bass cut out mid-note. The entire Fillmore East, all 2,600 people, fell into complete silence. Michael froze, his hand still on the girl's arm, but his momentum had stopped. Every eye in the venue was on them now. On him, on her, on Jimi. Jimi stood maybe 10 feet away, his Stratocaster hanging silent against his chest. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking directly at Michael. Let her go. Jimi's voice was quiet, not angry, not aggressive, just matter of fact. 3 words barely amplified by the mic in front of him, but in that silence, they carried through the entire venue. Michael didn't move. His training said one thing: remove the intruder, protect the performer, maintain order. But Jimi Hendrix was telling him something completely different. Let her go, Jimi said again, slightly louder this time. Michael's hand loosened. The girl pulled her arm free, rubbing the spot where he'd grabbed her. She looked terrified, tears starting to form in her eyes. She turned toward Jimi like she wanted to say something, to apologize, to explain. Jimi stepped toward her, leaving his guitar behind, walking to where she stood frozen at the edge of the stage. You okay? Jimi asked her. She nodded, unable to speak. What's your name? Sarah, she managed to whisper. Jimmy smiled, gentle and reassuring. Sarah, that's a good name. He turned to look at Michael, still standing there, unsure what to do. She's okay, she's with me. Michael stepped back. He'd been dismissed, his authority overridden. Part of him wanted to protest, to explain that he was just doing his job, that letting fans on stage created chaos, set bad precedents. But something in Jimmy's eyes stopped him. This wasn't a debate. This was a decision that had already been made. Michael moved back to his position at the side of the stage, but he didn't take his eyes off what was happening. Neither did anyone else in the Fillmore. Jimmy walked Sarah to the center of the stage, near the microphone stand. The crowd was perfectly still, watching, waiting to see what would happen next. You like music, Sarah? Jimmy asked, his voice now amplified through the PA system. Yes, she said, her voice shaking. You sing? She shook her head. Not really, just in my room. Jimmy nodded. That counts. He gestured to his band. We're playing Voodoo Child, you know it. I know every song you've ever recorded, Sarah said. And there was something in the way she said it that made Michael realize this wasn't just a fan rushing the stage on impulse. This meant something deeper to her. Jimmy seemed to understand too. Then you know the words. I do. Sing with me. Jimmy walked back to his guitar, picked it up, adjusted the strap. He nodded to Mitch and Noel. The band started playing again, picking up where they'd left off, but quieter now, more controlled, leaving space for something else. And then Jimmy started singing, and Sarah sang with him. Her voice wasn't trained. It wasn't powerful or technically perfect, but it was honest, raw, fragile but real. She sang the words like they meant something to her, like she'd been carrying them inside for years and was finally letting them out. Jimmy didn't overpower her. He matched her volume, played around her voice, supported it without drowning it. His guitar filled in the spaces where her voice wavered, carried the melody when she lost the key, created a sonic cushion that made her sound better than she probably was. From his position at the side of the stage, Michael watched Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding. Both musicians had adjusted their playing without being told. Mitch was playing softer, simpler patterns, holding back the power he usually unleashed. Noel had dropped to a minimal bass line, just roots and fifths, creating foundation without competing for space. They understood what Jimmy was doing. They were following his lead, making room for this fragile voice that had no business being on a professional stage, but somehow belonged there anyway. Michael stood at the side of the stage, watching this happen, trying to understand what he was witnessing. This wasn't how concerts worked. You didn't stop the show for a random fan. You didn't invite chaos onto the stage. You maintained control, kept things professional, protected the integrity of the performance. But Jimmy wasn't protecting anything. He was sharing. The stage, the music, the moment. He was giving it away. The song lasted maybe 3 minutes, though it felt longer. Time had stretched somehow, become elastic. When it ended, there was a beat of silence, that same pause that happens when something profound has just occurred and nobody wants to be the first to break the spell. Then the Fillmore erupted, not the wild, screaming applause of a rock concert, something different, slower, deeper. People were standing, some were crying, hands clasped together or raised in the air. Sarah stood frozen at the center of the stage, overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face. Jimmy walked over to her, said something too quiet for the microphone to catch, and she nodded. He gestured toward the side of the stage, and she walked off, passing right by Michael. Their eyes met for a second. Michael expected to see triumph, vindication, a sense of having gotten what she wanted. But that's not what he saw. He saw gratitude, relief, something like healing. She disappeared into the backstage area, escorted by another security guard who'd been watching from the wings. Jimmy turned back to the crowd. Let's keep going, he said simply, and launched into the next song. The show continued for another hour. Michael stayed at his post, doing his job, watching the crowd. But something had shifted inside him. Every time he scanned for potential problems, every time he evaluated someone as a threat, he thought about Sarah, about how she'd looked terrified when he grabbed her, about how Jimmy had seen something Michael had missed. He kept replaying the moment in his head, the way his hand had closed around her arm, the fear in her eyes, the authority he'd felt, the certainty that he was doing the right thing. And then Jimmy's voice cutting through all of that certainty, revealing it as hollow. Michael had spent 2 years in the military before this job. He'd been trained to follow orders, to execute procedures without hesitation, to see threats and neutralize them. That training had served him well in security work. It kept people safe. It prevented chaos. But tonight, for the first time, he wondered if there was something his training had left out. Something about reading situations instead of just reacting to them. Something about recognizing when the rules needed to bend. During the final song of the night, Michael found himself watching Jimmy differently, not as a performer to protect, but as someone who operated by a completely different set of principles. Jimmy played like the stage belonged to everyone, like the music wasn't his to hoard but to share. Every note felt like an invitation, not a performance. Michael had worked security for dozens of famous musicians, but he'd never seen anyone approach their craft with this kind of generosity. After the show ended, after the crowd had filed out and the venue was emptying, Michael stayed backstage. He wasn't sure why. He should have clocked out, gone home, put the night behind him, but he needed to understand what had happened. He found Jimmy in the dressing room, sitting alone, smoking a cigarette, his guitar case open on the floor. "Can I talk to you?" Michael asked from the doorway. Jimmy looked up, recognized him. "Security guy, come in." Michael stepped inside, closed the door. "I need to ask you something." "Okay. Why did you do that? Let that girl on stage. Stop the show for her." Jimmy took a drag from his cigarette, considered the question. "You grabbed her pretty hard." "I was doing my job." "I know." "Then why?" "Because she needed it more than the show needed to be perfect," Jimmy said. "The music's not more important than the people. The music exists for the people." "You saw her face afterward?" Michael nodded. "Then you know why." "But what if everyone rushes the stage now? What if you lose control?" Jimmy smiled slightly. "Control's an illusion anyway. You think I control what happens when I play? I just show up and see where it goes. Tonight it went to Sarah. Tomorrow it'll go somewhere else." Michael didn't know what to say to that. His entire approach to security was built on control, on maintaining order, on preventing chaos. And here was Jimi Hendrix telling him chaos was fine, maybe even necessary. "You're going to have people rushing the stage at every show now," Michael said. "Maybe," Jimmy agreed. "Or maybe people will understand that tonight was for Sarah, not for them. Either way, I'm not going to live scared of what might happen. I'm going to respond to what is happening." Michael left the dressing room more confused than when he'd entered. He worked the third show the next night, the final performance of Jimmy's Fillmore East residency. He watched the crowd carefully, wondering if Jimmy was right, if everyone would try to rush the stage. Nobody did. The show went smoothly, professionally. But something was different. The crowd was more present, more invested, like they'd witnessed something the night before that changed how they understood their relationship to the music and to the person making it. Michael kept working security at the Fillmore for another year. He worked hundreds of shows, dealt with countless situations that required quick decisions, firm action, unwavering professionalism. But he never grabbed anyone the way he'd grab Sarah again. He learned to pause, to read situations instead of just reacting to them, to understand that control wasn't always the answer, that sometimes the best thing you could do was step back and let something unexpected happen. In late 1969, about 6 months after that night, Michael was working another show at the Fillmore when he saw Sarah again. She was in the crowd, fourth row this time, watching a different band. During a break between sets, she came up to the security barrier. "You probably don't remember me," she said. Michael looked at her, recognition immediate. "I remember. I wanted to thank you." "For what? Grabbing you?" She smiled slightly. "For letting go. I know that wasn't easy. Jimmy told me to. But you did it. You could have argued. You could have pulled me off anyway. But you listened." She paused, looking down at her hands. "That night changed something for me. I'd been in a dark place for a long time. I came to that show not sure if I wanted to keep going. And then Jimmy saw me, really saw me, like I mattered." Michael didn't know what to say. He'd thought about that night constantly for 6 months, But he'd never considered what it meant from Sarah's side. "Thank you for doing your job," she continued, "and thank you for knowing when to stop." She disappeared back into the crowd before Michael could respond. When Jimi Hendrix died in September 1970, Michael was devastated. He'd only met him that one time, talked to him for maybe 5 minutes in a dressing room at the Fillmore. But that conversation had changed how he understood his job, his life, his relationship to uncertainty. Years later, in 1987, a journalist writing a book about the Fillmore East tracked Michael down. She'd heard about that night in May 1969, wanted to know what had happened from his perspective. "What did you learn?" she asked him. Michael thought for a long time before answering. "I learned that my job was to protect people," he finally said, "but I'd defined protect too narrowly. I thought it meant keeping them separated, keeping order, preventing contact. Jimmy showed me that sometimes protecting people means letting them connect. That girl needed to be on that stage more than she needed to be kept in the audience. And the audience needed to see what Jimmy did for her more than they needed a perfect, uninterrupted show." "Do you think he was right to stop the concert?" "I know he was right. I was there. I saw her face afterward. I saw what it did to the crowd. That wasn't entertainment. That was something else. Something more important." "What would you call it?" Michael smiled. "Humanity. Just basic human recognition. Jimmy saw someone who needed something, and he gave it to her. No hesitation, no calculation. Just gave it." The journalist published the story in her book. It's one of the lesser-known Jimi Hendrix stories, overshadowed by Monterey, by Woodstock, by all the legendary performances and outrageous tales. But for Michael Torres, it was the story that mattered most. He kept working security for another 15 years, eventually becoming head of security at Madison Square Garden. He trained hundreds of security guards over those years, and he always told them about that night at the Fillmore. "Your job is to protect people," he'd say, "but remember, sometimes people need protection from you." The night Michael Torres grabbed Sarah and Jimi Hendrix, told him to let her go, changed how one security guard understood his role in the world. It didn't make headlines. It didn't define Jimmy's legacy. But it mattered, because that's what Jimmy did. He didn't just make music. He made moments that changed people, sometimes in front of thousands, sometimes in a dressing room conversation that lasted 5 minutes. And those moments kept reverberating long after the music stopped.